Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep into something truly unique today, Criollas grapes. You might have heard of them, maybe not, but trust me, their story is fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about grapes that have seen history unfold.
Right. They traveled from Europe to the Americas centuries ago, and they basically adapted and evolved in this whole new world.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Totally. And now we've got these distinct varieties. Criollas, basically the heart and soul of Latin American wine.
The foundation, really. We can trace it all back to those early European colonists.
The Spanish and Portuguese, right?
Exactly. They brought their Vinisher of vines probably from places like Andalusia or the Canary Islands.
For religious reasons, right? They needed wine for their rituals.
That and, well, everyday life in the colonies needed a little wine too.
I hear that. But over time, these European grapes changed, didn't they?
They did. They had to adapt to survive. Different climates, different soils.
I bet that wasn't easy for them.
Sometimes they were even just propagated by seed. Imagine that.
Wow, that's going old school.
It is, and that's how we ended up with Criollas, grapes that are truly native to the Americas now.
A real evolution experiment playing out over centuries. That's pretty cool. But, I've heard some people say that Criollas wines are, well, not great quality.
Ah, yeah, that's a bit of a myth, to be honest, one that modern winemaking is really proving wrong.
Really? So Criollas can make good wine?
They absolutely can. We're seeing winemakers, especially in places like Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Peru, even Brazil, creating some high-quality, complex Criollas wines, wines with a real sense of place.
So it's not just the grape itself, it's also the winemaking.
Precisely. Modern techniques are bringing out the best in Criollas, highlighting their unique qualities.
That makes sense. Another thing I've heard is that Criollas wines all kind of taste the same. Like they lack that distinct personality you find in, say, a Malbec or a Sauvignon Blanc.
Another misconception, unfortunately.
Is it really?
It is. Criollas are incredibly diverse. We're talking a whole bunch of different varieties, different clones, each one adapted to its own specific terroir.
So even within the same country, you could have two totally different Criollas wines.
You absolutely could. A Criolla from a high-altitude vineyard in the Andes is going to taste completely different from one grown in a coastal valley.
Terroir, right. That magical combination of soil, climate, everything that gives a wine its character.
Exactly. And that's what makes exploring Criollas wines so fascinating. They really are windows into the landscapes of Latin America.
Okay, so we've busted the myth about quality and the myth about them all tasting the same. But what about the idea that Criollas are only good for rosés and light reds?
True, they do excel in those styles.
There's more to it.
Oh, yeah, much more. They can produce full-bodied reds that can age beautifully. And we can't forget about the whites. There are varieties like Muscatel de Alexandria Criolla that make some really interesting white wines.
This deep dive is already changing everything I thought I knew about Criollas. I didn't realize they were this complex and versatile.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
Okay, now I'm really curious to get into specifics. Obviously, we can't cover every single Criollas variety.
There are a lot of them.
Right. But are there a few key examples that our listeners should know about, maybe ones that really highlight what Criollas are all about?
Absolutely. We should definitely talk about Criolla Chica. That one's got a fascinating history.
What's so special about it?
Well, for one thing, it might be one of the very first grapes planted in the Americas.
Wow, really? So it goes way back.
It does, and it has all sorts of different names depending on where you are. In South America, it's often called Criolla Chica or Listan Prieto.
I've heard of Listan Prieto. Isn't it also grown in the Canary Islands?
That's right. But in Chile, it's known as País.
Okay, so same grape, different names.
Exactly. And this grape, it's grown all over the place, from Mexico all the way down to Argentina.
That's one well-traveled grape.
It is, and it's a great example of how adaptable Criollas are. In some places, it makes these light, fresh, fruity wines that are perfect for just casual sipping.
Sounds perfect for a summer afternoon.
Doesn't it? But here's where it gets even more interesting. In Chile, they're actually having a bit of a país revival.
Really?
Yeah, they're using century-old vines to make these modern, expressive wines that are really turning heads.
So this historic grape is getting a new life in the hands of modern winemakers.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing to see.
It is. Okay, so we've got Criolla Chica, the historical traveler. What other red Criollas should we talk about?
Well, there's Criolla Grande. It's another important one, especially in Argentina, known for being really productive and resistant to disease.
Sounds like a workhorse grape for winemakers.
That's a good way to put it. It's traditionally been used for everyday table wines and rosés.
The kind of wines you can just enjoy without overthinking it.
Exactly. But now we're seeing winemakers starting to experiment more with Criolla Grande, creating more complex, structured wines.
Showing off its hidden potential.
You got it. It's a fascinating grape. So we've got Criolla Chica with all its history, and then Criolla Grande proving that it can be more than just simple. What kind of flavors can we expect from these two? With Criolla Chica, think light and bright. Lots of fresh red fruit, cherries, strawberries, maybe a little touch of spice and some earthy
Sounds
notes.
delicious.
Criolla Grande, think more ripe red fruit, maybe some floral hints, and a touch of herbal character. It can be quite complex.
Okay, now I have to ask about Torrontés Riojano.
Yes.
It's Argentina's most famous white wine, arguably. And I know it has some connection to Criollas, right?
You're right, it is quite famous. Those Torrontés from Salta are really special.
Absolute.
It's not a pure Criolla, though.
It's not.
It's actually a natural cross between Criolla Moscato Amarillo and, you guessed it, the Stan Prieto.
That's right, the one we were just talking about, Criolla Chica.
Exactly.
So it's like a descendant of a Criolla.
Carrying on that legacy in a new form, and because of its cultural significance and how it's adapted so well to Argentine terroir, it often gets grouped with Criollas.
It makes sense. So what makes Torrontés Riojano so unique? What sets it apart from other white wines?
It's incredibly aromatic, very vibrant. You get this beautiful bouquet of white flowers, jasmine, orange blossom.
Oh, I love those floral notes in white wine.
And then you have the zesty citrus notes like lemon and grapefruit. You also get those white peach flavors and even a hint of spice sometimes.
Wow, a whole symphony of flavors.
It's a beautiful example of how even Criollas that came from crossings can still express that unique terroir of Latin America. It's a testament to how adaptable and, well, how much potential these grapes have.
I love that. Okay, we've talked history, debunked some myths, even gotten a taste of a few specific varieties. But now I'm wondering, how does terroir actually impact the different Criollas? I mean, they're grown all over Latin America, so I imagine those regional differences must come through in the wines.
You're absolutely right. The fact that Criollas have adapted to so many different climates and soils over centuries, that really allows them to express unique terroir characteristics in their wines. Different regions have their own star Criollas varieties, and each one tells a story about where it comes from.
Okay, I'm ready for a little terroir tour. Where should we start? Argentina, let's go back to those high-altitude vineyards, specifically Salta, that region called Cafayate. What kind of Criollas are we going to find thriving there?
Salta. It's a special place. You know those vineyards are some of the highest in the world?
I did hear that.
Intense sunlight, cool nights, those dramatic temperature swings between day and night. Makes it perfect for certain Criollas, Criolla Grande, for instance, and Cereza.
They can handle those extremes.
They've adapted over centuries. And the wines, they have this concentrated flavor, a real sense of place. You can taste Salta in them.
So even though it's a harsh environment, it actually makes the wines more interesting.
Exactly. Think about it. During the day, all that warmth helps those grapes ripen, develop those sugars that turn into alcohol. Then at night, it cools down and the grapes get to rest, preserving that acidity.
Ah, so you get the sweetness and the refreshing acidity, all thanks to that temperature swing.
That balance is key. And it's what makes those Salta wines so delicious, it's so food-friendly.
I'm convinced. Salta's going on my wine travel bucket list. What about Chile? What should we explore there?
Chile. We gotta go south to the Itata and Bio valleys.
They grew Criollas there.
Some of the oldest wine regions in Chile, those are. And they have this long history of país cultivation.
País, right. That's what they call Criolla Chica in Chile.
Yep. Same grape, different name. And those valleys with their cool coastal climate, ideal for país.
So even though it's the same grape, the Chilean País wines, they'll have their own personality thanks to the terroir.
They do. Think about those granite and schist soils, the Pacific Ocean, just a stone's throw away. That cool breeze helps keep those grapes nice and acidic.
So what we end up with is a País that's fresh, vibrant, maybe with a little minerality.
You got it. And sometimes you even get this slightly salty, savory note. It's the coast talking to you through the wine.
I like the sound of that. Okay, let's jump to Mexico. What do we got there?
Mexico, let's head to Baja California, the Valle de Guadalupe specifically. It's a region that's really making a name for itself these days.
For Criollas.
You bet. That's where Mission comes into play. Remember, Mission is just another name for Listan Prieto, which is also Criolla Chica.
It's like a grape with multiple passports. Amazing how one grape can have so many different names and expressions. So what makes Valle de Guadalupe so special for Mission?
Think Mediterranean climate, warm days, cool nights. Not too different from parts of Spain or Italy. Perfect for Mission.
So we might get some wines with a little more structure, a bit more complexity.
You're on the right track. You often find those lovely dark fruit notes, some spice, and maybe a hint of earthiness.
Okay, last stop on our Criollas terroir tour, Peru. What's waiting for us there?
Peru is interesting. A lot of their grapes actually go towards making pisco. You know, that brandy.
That do, yeah.
But there's a growing group of winemakers who are starting to rediscover what Criollas can do for table wines.
I love that. Bringing it back to the table.
One region to keep an eye on is Ica. It's a desert region. Pretty amazing that they can grow grapes there at all.
A desert? Really, I wouldn't have thought.
It's remarkable. They have this grape called Cabranta. It's super resilient, adaptable, most widely planted grape in Peru it is, but mostly for pisco.
Right, right.
But some producers are starting to make these really interesting dry white wines from Cabranta.
So we might get a little taste of the desert in those.
You might. There's this unique salinity, a minerality that reflects that desert terroir. It's fascinating. So we've gone from the high-altitude vineyards of Salta to the cool coastal valleys of Chile, then over to Baja California, and now we're in the Peruvian desert. It's just amazing how adaptable these Criollas are. But how do winemakers even work with these grapes, especially given some of these challenging environments?
That's a great question. The folks working with Criollas, they're a special bunch. They're not just making wine, they're guardians of tradition. But they're also innovators, always finding ways to coax the best out of these grapes. It's got to be a different game compared to working with the more common international varieties.
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest hurdles is water management. Think about those drier regions like Salta or Ica. Not a lot of rain.
I imagine that creates some challenges.
It does, but Criollas have this natural advantage. Over centuries, they've developed these deep root systems. They can tap into water sources far underground.
Wow, so they're built to survive those dry conditions.
They are, but winemakers, they still have to be smart about water use. Drip irrigation, for instance, delivering water right to the roots, minimizing waste.
Working in harmony with nature, it sounds like. Finding ways to grow grapes sustainably in these sometimes difficult environments.
Exactly. And then there's the sunlight, especially in those high-altitude terroirs. The sun is intense.
I bet.
Winemakers have to be strategic about how they manage the canopy, making sure those grapes don't get sunburned.
Pruning the vines in a certain way or using netting.
Things like that, yeah. It's all about finding the sweet spot. Enough sun to ripen the grapes, but not so much that it hurts them.
It's really incredible how much care and attention goes into growing these grapes.
It is. And then, of course, we can't forget about the soil. Criollas are grown in all sorts of different soil types.
And each one is going to give the wine a little something different.
Right. For example, sandy soils, those drain well, and they often produce wines that are lighter in body with more delicate flavors. You find those in places like Ica.
What about the rocky volcanic soils you get in Salta?
Those can actually retain heat, which is helpful in cooler climates. And they often give the wine a distinct minerality, an earthy, almost savory quality.
It's fascinating how all these elements, the climate, the water, the soil, and then the choices the winemaker makes all come together to create these unique wines.
It really speaks to the power of terroir and to the dedication and the skill of the people who work with these grapes.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the challenges and the triumphs of growing Criollas, but now I'm curious about the winemaking itself. What kind of approaches and techniques are winemakers using to create these wines? So we know Criollas can handle some pretty tough growing conditions and still produce amazing grapes. But what about the winemaking process? What kind of styles are winemakers going for with these grapes?
You know, that's one of the things that's so exciting about Criollas right now. There's a lot of experimentation happening. Some winemakers are using those modern techniques, creating these really polished, elegant wines.
I can imagine.
But then you have others who are going for a more natural approach, less intervention, letting the grapes and that terroir really shine through.
That makes sense. I've been hearing a lot about this natural wine movement lately. Is that something we're seeing with Criollas?
Oh, absolutely. It's a natural fit, actually. Criollas are already naturally resilient, expressive. So a lot of winemakers are thinking, why mess with a good thing? Let those natural qualities shine through.
So what does that actually mean, natural winemaking?
Well, it's all about minimizing manipulation in the winery, using native yeasts for fermentation, avoiding additives, maybe aging the wines in neutral oak or even clay vessels. All those things help preserve those pure, authentic flavors.
Like a back-to-basics approach.
Exactly. And Criollas, they tend to have lower tannins than a lot of international varieties, so these gentler techniques, they really allow those delicate fruit and floral aromas to come through.
That makes sense. Okay, I'm already getting thirsty. Can we talk about some specific examples of Criollas wines? And maybe the people who are making them.
Let's do it. Let's head back to Argentina, to Salta, for starters.
Back to those high-altitude vineyards.
Oh, yeah. One producer I always recommend checking out is El Porvenir de Cafayate. They're making some seriously expressive Criollas.
What should we look for?
They're a Malta Absoluto Criolla. It's a Criolla Grande, and it's amazing. You get all that red fruit, those floral aromas, and then this incredible minerality. It's like they bottled the essence of Salta.
I'll have to track that one down. Are there any other Salta producers we should know about?
Definitely. Domingo Molina, they're a smaller, family-run operation, and they're making some beautifully elegant Criollas. The Criolla Tinto, it's a lighter style, super fresh and lively.
Okay, adding that to the list. Let's go back to Chile now. Any standout producers or wines there?
Chile, that's País country. So let's head back down to those southern regions, Itata, Biobío. If you're talking Pais, you have to talk about Louis Antoine Luc. He's a legend, been championing this grape for decades.
I've heard his wines are incredible.
They are. He's all about minimal intervention, letting the grapes do their thing. As Clos Ouvert Pais, for example, it's a field blend, single vineyard, all that. Fermented with native yeasts, aged in old barrels, it really transports you to that place.
Sounds like my kind of wine. Any other Chilean producers making waves with Baiz?
Roberto Henriquez, he's in the Bio Valley, making these really elegant, mineral-driven Pais wines. You can taste the cool climate in them. His Rivera de Nocho Pais, that's another one to look out for.
Chile's calling my name. Okay, Mexico, what do we got there?
For Mexico, we're going back to Valle de Guadalupe. That's Mission territory. One winery that's doing great things with it is Vena Cava. They have this amazing gravity flow winery built right into the hillside.
Oh, I've heard of them. Aren't they known for their natural wines?
They are. They make this killer Mission Rosé. It's super bright, juicy with a hint of spice.
And perfect for pairing with all that amazing Mexican food.
Exactly.
Okay, last stop on our tasting tour. Peru. What treasures can we find there?
Peru is really off the beaten path when it comes to Criollas wines, but that's part of the fun, right?
Absolutely.
One of the oldest wineries in Peru, Tacama, they have this experimental line, and in it is a red wine made from Negra Criolla. It's a really rare variety indigenous to Peru.
Sounds like a special bottle.
It is, and if you're looking for something even more adventurous, check out Bodega Murda. They're in Ica, and they're making a really interesting red wine from the Muller grape, another rare Criollas.
Peru is definitely going on my wine travel bucket list. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from Argentina to Chile, Mexico, and Peru. It's amazing to see how diverse and just how exciting this world of Criollas wines really is.
It really is, and this is only the beginning. As more people discover these wines, I think the appreciation for them, for their connection to Latin American history and culture, it's only going to grow.
I have a feeling you're right. So for those listening who are now hopefully just as excited about Criollas as we are, what's the best way for them to start exploring these wines?
My advice, be adventurous. Don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone and try something new. You can find Criollas wines at a lot of wine shops these days, or you can look online. And if you ever get the chance to travel to Latin America, make sure to visit some of those Criollas producing regions. You won't regret it.
That's great advice. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Criollas grapes. We hope you learned something new and maybe discovered some new wines to try. Until next time, happy exploring.